when I can follow his brilliant brain, the answer is profound. But the background is I went back to university. I'd initially trained in holistic thinking, which was radical at the time, in the early 70s anyway, in human ecology. And I went back after 40 years doing a PhD in that area. And I discovered, because of the computer era in that time that had occurred since the 70s, our understanding of complex adaptive systems, self-organisation, emergent properties and all that sort of stuff, and which I think is behind Regen Ag. What we're doing is enabling those complex adaptive systems of the past. And so it helped me understand how Regen worked, but then I hadn't connected the dots to human health. And I was blown away when I first heard Zach, because we co-evolved in an African landscape for a million years, our species or so. And yes, a woman hunter-gatherer is foraging up to 500 or more food species they recognise, but the men aren't hunting meat. They're also hunting animals that have browsed the landscape full of phytochemicals and nutrients in the tens of thousands. And suddenly here was an explanation why this lagged effect between us destroying the landscapes we'd been co-evolved for and delivering monocultural and nutrient-empty foods to the civilization. There's this delayed effect of all these exponential modern diseases. And along comes Zach and brilliantly explains that second brain of ours and its interconnection to landscape and human health. And just gave me that complete holistic understanding. And I think his contribution's been absolutely enormous.
I'm glad I get to go next, because I feel like I pale in comparison to Charles here. So yeah, I'm just a doctor that came along with inquisitive mind and started, recognizing problems in my patient population around the nutrition clinic that I had started in 2010, and was recognizing that food was no longer working to reduce inflammation. In fact, kale and other cruciferous vegetables seem to be increasing inflammation in a handful of my patients. Certainly not everyone, but there was a subset that was really showing this damage from kale. And that sent me down into the first time, deep dive into soil mechanics, into nutrient production in plants. I had been doing most of my chemotherapy and cancer research with vitamin A compounds. So I had an understanding and a kind of hard-held belief that nutrients in plants were good for fighting cancer, but it had never dawned on me the role of soil in that process. And so was what brought me to Charles's work. Ultimately, was a deeper dive into soil. And as we started studying soil, what we found was not only what was missing, but we found a lot of new stuff since the 1970s, when all that nutrition science came out to suggest that my efforts at the nutrition clinic should work. That was the debut primarily of glyphosate and a number of other herbicides, but glyphosate became this hotbed. And when we set out to make a film about glyphosate damage in the ecosystem to human health, we wanted to show that the Mississippi River in the United States, which is our largest river catchment area, is concentrating 85% of the glyphosate sprayed in our country into a single water system. And at the end of that river, we see Cancer Alley, the highest rates of cancer in humans in the world. And so we just set out to tell that story. And I became dismally depressed at the very first farm we stopped at, and we're filming way up in Minnesota in the north end of the tributaries of the Mississippi. And what I was stunned by was the unawareness and inefficacy of organic practices to impact soil health. And we were seeing worse soil health on organic farms than we were on some of the conventional farms, and it was stunning. And so there was this sudden frightening moment of like, whoa, even the people that I thought were on the front edge of this health movement weren't there. And as we started showing the data and showing the damage, there was a deeper, lesion or barrier to progress that I found, and that was the mind of the farmer. It is difficult to change any human's mindset. And it's, Mark Twain said it famously in the United States. He said, it's much easier to fool someone than convince somebody that they've been fooled. And I feel like that's what's happened to both physicians and farmers, is we were fooled by a chemical industry, and now we're having a very hard time reversing our mindset because we're afraid and we're programmed not to believe that we were duped. And we have all these defense mechanisms. And along comes Charles with the call of the reed warbler. And it was like a bombshell goes off in my head as I watched this man's journey from, multi-generation farm experience kind of thing into his own journey into watching the damage to the ecosystems through conventional farming. And then that first chapter of your book, Charles, is like, the best sermon I've ever heard. The ways in which nature called you back into her creative mode, her graceful womb, and rebirthed you in those first couple chapters of the book. It gave me huge hope because I suddenly realized that I didn't have any burden or any capacity to change farmers' minds, but that Mother Earth and her nature was so capable of regrounding farmers in the soul of what they do. And I think that's what we are missing as physicians, is the soul of what we do. And we're starting, farmers and physicians have the highest suicide rates of almost any profession in the world. And I think that's common between the two of us, is we outsourced our purpose to a chemical industry and therefore lost the soul of the altruism and the good effect that we wanted to bring forth. We wanted to grow good food, so we became farmers. We wanted to bring health, so we became physicians. And when we find that our work seems to be undermining the outcome, every time you grow a chemical crop and you see your land declining and it's harder and harder to find a buyer for your food because 26 countries around the world are now banning, glyphosate grown, Roundup crops. And we all have a need to get back to our sense of soul, our sense of purpose. And Charles, you've given us that most critical of pathways. So hats off to you and thank you.
Thanks, mate. I'm one of many, of course, but yeah, it's a nice connection.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Well, in a word, simplified, simplistic, which is the opposite of how nature works, obviously, and how human society should work. We have few suppliers, a couple of big, to use an Australian vernacular, mongrel duopoly operations that deliver what they want to deliver to us with limited choice and crap food. And now we're seeing, and you know better than any of us in these floods or bushfires, the vulnerability of having that system and its delivery rather than regional supplies and backyard independence and all those sorts of things that humans really are designed for. And so virtually no choice, no self-determination. And all that does is exacerbate what Zach just touched on, this disconnect between we humans and healthy food and the health implications that comes from that. And so that leads to the question, what are the key pathways in a transition to a new food system? And there's only a new food system, or if you like, an old food system, but better organised with modern transport that's going to turn around the health crisis. And that obviously means regenerative ag, no glyphosate, and no simplification of complex adaptive systems. I mean, if someone asks me what is regen ag, it's us, whether it's grazing, cropping, growing trees or whatever, stepping back and letting that ancient millions of years of co-evolved system get back to doing what she's good at, which is delivering in food better nutrients and better fibre and all that sort of stuff. And so I think the second part of your question was, what are the key pathways? So I can give you an example. The Haggertys in Western Australia, who I think have delivered one of the great new cropping mechanisms, natural intelligence agriculture, eliminating all fertilisers and chemicals. They're cropping now 50,000 acres, having started with a debt on 600. I'm not arguing for bigness, but it just shows you that they've made great profitability in turning off the drug addict drip to the big transnationals, just by using worm juice and compost extract. And so they've got this wonderful food, their resilience to, compared to neighbours in a wet harvest time, to frost damage, rain damage on crops because of the nutrient integrity of that grain. And they've travelled the world as well as Australia, and they can't find anyone who wants to take the product because it's outside the traditional chains. And that's at the big scale, and the same applies to the small scale. So, we have to shift to this peri-urban agriculture as well as we farmers growing food for an increasing demanding population. So, this re-engineering that delivery, getting rid of the crap food, going localization, which I know you guys are on about up there. So it all comes back to us throwing off this education system post Second World War. Zach knows better than me. I mean, look at his career, science, and I'm trained in science. It's fantastically wonderful, but if you're not careful, it pushes you down this reductionist path. And we have to go back to holistic thinking, combining the best of everything, and that gets rid of the duopolies and the industrial mindset of our modern economies. And maybe we'll touch on leadership later, but that's a dog's breakfast explanation of
it. To expand on what was just being said there by Charles so well, is that one thing that we've found over the last few years of Farmers' Footprint in the U.S. is that there's a real need for coordination of all stakeholders in the food system for us to really define and execute a regenerative plan. Because when we first set up, shop, and we were, meeting with Soil Health Academy and all these regen farm, groups around the country, it was all about soil health, soil management, and that made sense to me. But the longer we kept, working through with these farmers, now how do you keep that value-added product that how do you get your revenue out of that? We started realizing, holy shoot, we've got problems and bottlenecks all across the system that's keeping organic and regen organic out of the mainstream. And it's because the way in which storage, distribution, transportation, and brokerage of supply chain all got centralized. And in centralization of these global supply chains, you can't take one farmer's product, regardless of what it is or how it's grown, and maintain its identity through the trafficking to local storage, regional storage, transportation, into the distribution model. And so as we started looking at that, we realized we're now needing a much broader education on it. And so as we dove in, what we found was much deeper than that. Is we have a real tragedy about the way in which human resources are treated in this system. And so we launched Renourish Studios as a think tank out of Farmers' Footprint that we're excited to expand to Australia through Blair's work here. And Renourish is bringing together stakeholders from across the industry, and we're really looking at 5,000 years of recorded, and probably much longer than that in human history, but 5,000 years of recorded history of extreme humanitarian abuses in food systems. They date way back. So we've been using slave labor since recorded history to grow food, which is just indicative of almost this adversarial relationship that we have to food. I was recently down in the rainforest in the Amazon jungle in Ecuador and stayed with the Achuar tribe, which is the most recent, the last, indigenous peoples in the world to make contact with the industrialized world in 1996. And so they're barely touched by civilization in some ways. And they've been in the same region of the rainforest for 40,000 years of their oral history. And they never once ran out of food, and they have no sense of scarcity in their food. They don't store food. They walk out every morning, they collect what they need, they cook it as a community, share it among themselves, and there's no sense of scarcity. But they created incredibly cool mechanisms of regeneration in that each family develops 3 different farm plots or garden plots to support themselves in 3 different ecosystems within the jungle, so that if there's natural disaster, flooding of the Amazon happening all the time, there's one at high ground that's always going to be resilient there. So they figured out over a 40,000 year history all of this, but at the root of it was this sense of sovereignty to the individual, to the family, to the food itself, to the land itself. And I think you find that in almost any indigenous peoples as you go back far enough. But as soon as we start to go beyond the family unit, and we go beyond growing for more than 25, 30 people, we start to see this phenomenon of slave labor. And so at Renor Studios, we're really working on how do we start to focus or expand our compass or our view on the word regeneration to include human capital, built capital, financial capital, and social capital. And if we look at those four buckets, we start to realize we've got a much different opportunity to change system very quickly, which we didn't do with organic. And here we are 40 years down the road of organic, and we've only got 4 to 6% of the food in the marketplace grown organically. So we can't repeat that. We need something radically faster and broader in adoption than we did with organic, and it needs to be fundamentally more grounded in these real issues around that space. So I'm excited for all of us to continue to work together to think about how do we personally become part of a regenerative movement. And soil is going to be downstream and upstream of that. But you, in your household right now, listening to this, can start to reintegrate nature into your basic life. And you can become a part of a regenerative movement that will reinforce at every level. How do you manage your finances in the home? How do you make your investments? What sort of food systems are you tied into? In which ways are you trying to expand your social experience to biodiverse viewpoints and biodiverse, sociopolitical views? That's going to be the mission for all of us now, is how do we get out of the ruts that we've been adopted into and really expand our concept of regeneration.
Yeah, beautiful.
All bars off, there's no cap on it. I mean, we can just freaking blow this world up with beauty. And Charles's work really, I think, speaks to this, the way in which he took his farm into the beauty that he achieved there, as well as so many other farmers who have adopted these practices of systems thinking. And I love your education background, Charles, there, that you start with that systems engineering or systems thought kind of process. And my excitement is that if we do this right with food systems, we can immediately apply it to transportation, energy, education, sociopolitics. This is the beginning of a new movement in which we rewrite humanity back into nature. We have put ourselves, not only written ourselves out of the definition, we put ourselves in opposition to nature in her definition. So if you read the Oxford English Dictionary, it says that nature is everything in the world, including landscapes, minerals, plants, animals, everything as opposed to humans or produced by humans. That's the freaking definition of nature. Humans, or everything we've ever created, is in opposition to nature. And if you look at what's happened to the planet since we showed up, I would have to agree. We have been in opposition to her. We have tried to, extract, destroy, abuse in every shape or form through every single industry. Energy's gotten a lot of abuse over the years, but if you look at, good examples, what I just saw down in the Amazon jungle, huge new highways being built dead into the center of the Amazon rainforest with devastating effects. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? Is this the oil and gas industry? No. That's China building highways into the middle of the Amazon to mine all the balsa trees out of the Amazon to build the windmills for wind power. And it's just like, oh my God, what have we done? Like, here we have billions of dollars of ESG investment flowing in from governments and everybody else to build wind farms. And in the process, we are destroying the Amazon faster than we did with the oil and gas industry. So this is the myopic thing that keeps happening to us, because we only think of centralized, scalable technologies for monetary purposes, and we don't think about decentralizing the system so that our technologies are informed and intelligently deployed in regional zones with regional resources, with regional intelligence, And so I think that overall I get excited about the regen movement because it's essentially, and thank God, decentralizing the food system after thousands of years of centralization and monopolies and all of this. So the decentralized capacity of regen farming is showing us a pathway into energy technologies beyond.
Yeah, you're full of all the simple questions today. I just first want to add to what Zach has just touched on, because I'm actually friends with and have worked with just a couple of the leading planetary scientists who are looking at the Anthropocene, people like Will Stephan, etc. And I just do not think anyone appreciates that the leading planetary scientists from Rockstrom, all of them working in this space, say we've only got one generation, 25 years. If we don't turn the destabilised planet around, which includes food and all the stuff Zach's talking about, we're going to have almost certainly unpredictable runaway events that will be uncontainable. So, and I'll pick up on what Zach said, which is critically important. I don't think people appreciate how crucial a role Regen Ag can play, because, you know, we've got this extraordinary blue-green planet, the only one we know of in the universe, created by life itself, the blue-green, about 3.8 billion years ago, when that process started. And we've ended up with this blue-green planet's cushioned from the harmful universe, but it's got about 9 functional systems that maintain that precious integrity. Now, 6 of those systems are directly influenced by the way we farm. You know, biodiversity, climate, water, the integrated phosphorus-nitrogen cycle, the way we use land, and ocean acidification, because the more farming puts up carbon dioxide, the more it acidifies that other great balance mechanism in planetary health. The really exciting thing I'm saying to these planetary scientists, you guys have overlooked the capacity of farming, the way we use land, to be one of the very best key solutions in turning around this planetary crisis. So, and the human health crisis and everything that goes with it. So if that's not exciting to we farmers and those supporting it and making decisions to where they're going to buy food and therefore encourage people doing that path, I don't know what is. And so, yeah, I'm actually on the road at the moment. I've just spent a week designing farms for farmers so they can operate a proper grazing or whatever system, and by looking at landscape functionality. So I'm less involved, but some of them are involved with food, but I'm less involved with the new food movement. But my youngest daughter has been vitally involved for 3 or 4 years with it in Melbourne, and now she and a partner have gone to Western Australia and bought a farm, and they've found a place like Perth, the biggest city in Western Australia, just can't get enough of this new nutrient-dense, rich food off healthy landscapes, you know, microgreens or whatever it is. And, you know, and you talk to the Haggertys and all that sort of stuff, that the millers don't want to know about it, and even some of the markets. I think what's behind your question is, you know, in Australia, we farmers are a very small minority. So it's really the urban and the peri-urban movement that we really have to focus on, getting them up to speed and understanding the crisis and understanding what Zach's been on about so brilliantly for so long, that what they eat is what they are and what their health is. And you know, I've been into Sydney talking to organic butcher there and seeing the excitement of 100 or more people as they hear the message from a range of thinkers. You know, you can turn entire streets and everyone has chooks and a veggie garden and stuff. And I think the statistics in America are the same as Australia, that our green cosmetic lawns qualifies about number 6 in terms of land use, with chemical, herbicides, fertiliser. It's ludicrous, and we're lacking biodiversity and lacking health. You know, there's so many simple solutions if only we had leadership. Mm-hmm. And as an old Australian saying is, you know, current leaders you wouldn't feed with a Shanghai at 5 paces. But it's such a relevant question. So I think the pathway to turning around isn't just we farmers impacting those 6 destabilised out of 9 Earth systems, but we need the peri-urban and the urban people now to understand the depth of this crisis, and that all comes back to leadership, as I touched on before. And at the moment, where we need it politically, etc., there's none in sight. So we've got to get to the ballot box pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing that should we be putting Charles Massy up in a political position?
No way. I'm a bad politician. I'm not very diplomatic.
Maybe
No,
that's
there's
what
better
we need.
people that need to play. You need a particular box of skills to play that game, and uh, that's not for me. I'd rather get, do what I'm doing, get the ideas out there, and interacting with people like Zach. It's just and not, as the Australians would say, piddling in your pocket, Zach. Your influence in awakening us to this whole interconnection in healthy food is critical. So we need you to speak more, write more, etc., etc. It's one of the key factors, that sort of thinking, that's going to change the way that big urban population thinks, and understand why all our modern diseases in that delayed fashion after industrial ag came in, that 15-year lag, why there's this sudden exponential curve in all those major diseases. And I'm telling you nothing with your work in autism and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I was actually testifying in front of the EPA, which is our Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States this morning, and specifically around their current mandatory review of the allowed practices of pre-harvest spraying of glyphosate compounds as a desiccant. And this is how the highest concentrations reach our consumers, whether they be animals in the protein industry or our children through their food system. And it's stunning. This is the third time I've talked to the EPA, and over a 5-year period or whatever, and it's just amazing to watch science build and build and build, and the evidence be so undeniable, and yet these regulatory agencies are unable to turn that into action. Last time we presented over 170 scientific studies proving that glyphosate was directly responsible for this whole chronic disease epidemic that you're speaking to. And the head of the EPA panel that we were talking to gets up at the end. She says, "I'm sorry that we can't turn this into any meaningful change in our legislation because it's not presented in the form of a regulatory document." It's like our scientific paper suddenly can't. And it turns out that sure enough, about 4 years ago, somebody managed to pass a piece of legislation that said it was illegal to consider information that was presented in a form that was not in the form of a regulatory document. It's like, so you watch this happening, and there's a lot of reactions you can have to this, including hopelessness or hopefully humor mixed somewhere in it, because we're all one thing. There's nobody against us. We are simply struggling to find our way home as humanity, I believe. We have this deep belief that we are separated from nature, and therefore we are separated from our God. And so we believe that the divine is somewhere out there, and we have forgotten that it is within us. And this is what I get excited about the regen movement, is what happens on your farm, Charles, when you made your psychological shift, your psycho-spiritual awakening happens. The shift was instant. Nature didn't take a 15-year lag. And so there is a 15-year lag between, cancer epidemic and an insult. But regeneration, healing, happens instantly.
Yep.
And I believe that is the grace of the nature that we live in, the God that maybe is involved in the nature we live in, or whatever it is. But this force of nature, this force of life within us, is so much more radically powerful than are the toxins that we've invented as humankind. And so I want to encourage everybody listening that when we change mindset, we unleash healing in people and planet. And it is so radical, and it is so fast. And so I wouldn't be here sitting talking to you if I didn't believe there was hope. In the United States, we're seeing numbers like 8 years. If we don't change within the next 8 years, our entire food system, our oceans are dead. And we tip past that acidification threshold where we lose 97% of life on Earth. 8 years sounds impossible. So we need these radical, miraculous solutions that are sitting within nature. If it was our responsibility to figure out how to clean all that up in 8 years, we would be screwed. There's no way we have the speed of innovation, or the speed of changing our mindset, or speed of changing supply chains and everything else. But if we just stop what we're doing and give nature a leg up for a moment, she will speed through this so fast. And so when you think about becoming a part of or supporting Farmers Footprint Australia, we're asking you to become part of a healing event that will be unleashing Mother Nature, not human ingenuity or human, suck it up by our bootstraps kind of attitude. That doesn't work anymore. We need the miracle to happen, and the miracle is sitting beneath our feet. It's hovering over our head in the clouds. There's a system of water cycles, carbon cycles, nutrient cycles on this planet that just turn life on in an extreme way. So all we have to do is disrupt our behaviors that are interrupting or abusing those patterns of resilience and healing, and it happens on its own. And so we don't need to fix anything. We need to stop, pause, and finally listen as a species. And this is what Farmers Footprint has really been focused on the last few years in the US, and we're so excited for it to move to Australia, because what we found is really changing the system quickly is storytelling. Our favorite quote that we have found so far is a couple hundred years ago, I think, but it says that humans are not made of atoms, humans are made of story. And I love that concept that we really are the fabric of our culture, the fabric of our society is actually the storytelling that creates our sense of reality. And so, as the Maori and the Aboriginal peoples know so well, the power of the mythos, the story, is exactly what ties us back into that nature. It's what ties us to the miraculous rather than the concrete, physical nature that we seem to live in. And so we need to allow farmers to become poets again. We need to allow, this resurrection of the, poetic capacity of Charles Massy to be epidemic within the farm industry, because we need to honor that the fact that if you've chosen to go into farming, you are inherently a creative creature. You would not go into that industry at all if you didn't have hard drive for creativity. You guys are the best problem solvers on the planet. You are some of the most resilient humans I've ever met. You are salt of the earth, meaning that when you touch the earth, you change the earth. You are the salt that makes it flavored, and that's why we named it Farmer's Footprint. Actually, is an ancient Japanese saying that the best fertilizer for a farm is the footprint of the farmer. And so that concept is so exciting that if we get you all, the farmers, to touch the soil again, we will fundamentally change the nature that leaps forth. And so while it sounds like it's a passive process, let's just unleash nature's healing. It's actually, we are gifted with the opportunity not only to watch healing happen, but to participate in it. And this plant behind me reminds me of some studies that have come out recently. They put like EEG, electrical encephalogram contacts on plants, and then they have people talk to the plants, and you can show the behavior of the plant change electrically with the human's response back to that plant. And so we're starting to get this window into the possibility that we were actually designed as a species to co-create with the nature, the God, whatever we want to call it, and become part of the force of nature, become part of the creative potential within this planet. And as a physician, obviously all of us now, after the last 2 years, I think about the microbiome and viruses all the time. The virome, which is a description of the entire encyclopedia of the genetic material on the planet, is the sheer potential of life on Earth. And so when we see biology on the planet, microbes, swine, all the animals we blame in China, when we see them starting to produce viruses, it's because they are under stress. When any body or any cell goes under stress, it starts to produce variants of genetic code to try to find an adaptive capacity to escape the stressor. Right now, we are putting extinction level stress on the planet through our herbicide, pesticides, antibiotic use, and the rest, and we are creating a massive, sixth extinction here. But in the process, even despite our stupidity, we are actually creating the largest genomic database of potential the planet has ever seen. So if we stop doing what we are doing, and we start to co-create with nature, we're going to see species and varieties that have never existed before, because that's happened after every great extinction event. After the dinosaurs, which was our last great extinction some 55 million years ago, we lose 95% of life on Earth. Asteroid hits, covers all of the topsoil in dust, and kills the topsoil, and the planet dies. We're the asteroid this time. We are the catastrophic event happening to the topsoil. We're killing it. We're 97% of arable soils worldwide now are either depleted or severely depleted. 97%. So we are that catastrophic event. And after those dinosaurs, nature did not try to struggle back to make the Triceratops, which is weird, because if I was nature, I would sure make that dude again, because that was a cool looking creature. Instead, nature goes leaping forward and creates birds and mammals and ultimately humans. And so we are the result of the imagination of the virome. The genetic possibility of life on Earth has created us. It's so exquisite. It's so beautiful. And this is how we're behaving right now. And I have to know, and I have to hope that the virome now holds the database of genetic information as humanity dies itself down here. We have released our own genomic information out into with a billion and trillion new variants of every cell machinery, and there's going to be some higher intelligence of life, more complexity, more biodiversity. We went from ferns before the dinosaurs or with the dinosaurs to after that extinction, we went to flowering plants, trees, deciduous trees instead of just the ferns. We got, you know, evergreens. Like the explosion of biodiversity on the planet was bonkers because the virome kept the new potential. And so we've created new potential on this planet because we are the stressor. Now the question is, are we going to stick around and play to be co-creators? And we have that possibility.
Yeah, we should.
I think it's a wonderful development. I'm glad, well done, Zach, on bringing it here. You know, farmers, educators, doctors, scientists, business people, all singing in tune to save our planet. And I go back to a point Zach made earlier. If you look at evolutionary biology of humans, it appears that the modern human evolved about 250,000 years ago. Okay, the hominid species have been evolving for a couple of million or more, but that looks like the defining moment of we modern humans. And part of that is a change in our brains that reacts to metaphor. So what I'm getting at is part of our modern thinking relates to the impact of story and particularly metaphors that touch that. And so when you hear Zach's speech or speak and what we've been talking about here tonight, it's the cut through thing is going to be ideas, and particularly that metaphorical way we think. And I think what's really encouraging about this Farmer's Footprint is you've got this diverse brains trust across multidisciplines, all now singing in tune about the same thing. And so I think you guys can play a huge role. You know, having written books about the destruction of the wool industry, a $20 billion disaster that was covered up, etc., I have little faith in politicians. This has to be an underground movement. But an underground movement, not by a few radicals throwing the odd petrol bomb or whatever, or hanging a sign up. It's got to be by these influential group of leaders from respected professions, from farmers right through to doctors and scientists and business leaders. And there's a lot of business leaders now smart enough to see the long term, that if they don't get their act together, they're not going to, if we don't get our act together, they won't have a business anyway. And so I think it's a great development, and I would say all power to you guys. And it's what we need, something apolitical, but cuts through to the real truth of what Zach's just talked about. We are in that 60-odd million year window now where we're most probably going to be history, but life itself will carry on. It'd be nice to be part of that future. And here's our chance to try and ensure that. But whether it's 8 or 25 years, whatever it is, the urgency is extreme. And you would just think, you know, a Second World War crisis, for example, is quite immediate. This is 1,000-fold more immediate, but it's just too intangible for navel-gazing politicians who are the ones we've been depending on. Bugger the politicians. Now's the time for grassroots action by leaders, farmers, consumers, and the whole thing. And the politicians are followers. The action now has to be us, and it doesn't have to be radical, damaging action. It just has to be constructive collaboration that regenerates Earth, regenerates human health, and gets this story out. And so I come back to story. It's all about the way we are hardwired over that last 250,000 years. We are hardwired for really impactful story and metaphor. And we've just heard it in spades from Zach. So I think Farmer's Footprint's a great development.
It will be a co-creative journey.
I have to interrupt you there, though, because I want to lift Blair up there. Blair, before you go on, as if you aren't the one doing this, but it's exciting that I not wasn't a part of the on the ground effort to get Farmers Footprint there. This was Blair and his team coming together around him to inspire this, which is really a picture of regeneration in and of itself. I was actually in Melbourne raising awareness and trying to get some momentum to get Farmers Footprint started over in Australia in January of 2020. And so as I'm speaking, that day is all this news about we might have to mask, we might have social distancing, there might be a massive pandemic. And the talk that I had prepared happened to show that China was going to be this hotbed of viromics because of the overlap between glyphosate and air pollution. And so it was like I had this like 8 ball sitting there, like reading the future that would unfold over the next 2 years. And I think it was, fitting that as soon as I left Australia on the last flight out of there, the government made it illegal for me to ever come back, so that Blair could do his work well without me. Because really, this is the story of regen: is the concept of planting seeds everywhere, but not scaling in the old mindset of the Western civilization and colonialism and all of this. And so in a beautiful way, I can see Blair's work really taking off with his team, informed by local assets, informed by local resources, informed by the local spirit and the local indigenous peoples that are coming around this project in a way that I could have never done coming out of the United States to help do something over there. And so I think it's beautiful that, Australia, you all you're in the hot seat right now on the planet. That for whatever reason, your continent is showing the stressors more so than any other perhaps on the planet right now. I came over there in 2020 just on the tail end of the worst fires that had ever been seen really in Western civilization. And now here we are 2 years later seeing the worst flooding that we've seen on the continent in hundreds of years. And so what is going on in Australia is this pressure cooker moment of seeing the bottom fall out of the bucket of the resiliency of the ecosystem. And it may be the scale of the continent, and maybe its location geographically and geologically on the planet, maybe a lot of factors outside of farm behavior and all that. But I think that what I'm seeing there in Australia is a more concerted awareness than ever existed before. And so the silver lining of crisis is it tends to bring us together. And right now, I believe Australia is more focused, not at the government level. Obviously, your government's going some radical other direction, but that's a very small group of human beings. That I feel the community surge coming up through the woodwork of your country here, and there's this bubbling enthusiasm for change. And I was recently, maybe not that recent, a year and a half ago, on stage with Dolores Huerta here in the United States. She's the most decorated activist in the history of our country. She's been to the White House by every president to give her some award, dating back all the way to Eisenhower in the 1950s. So she's now in her late 80s and is still one of the most well-spoken, intelligent humans I've ever speak on just the sovereignty of life, the sovereignty of individuals, the sovereignty of each thing. And until we start to live as if we understood the sovereignty of others, we will continue to destroy ourselves. And so she does this beautiful talk, and I follow on, and we're doing this roundtable together. And then at the end of it, I started to tell her about Farmers Footprint, and she's listening, and I'm telling her about food systems and blah, blah, blah. Dolores Huerta was the right-hand woman to Cesar Chavez with the Chicano farmers movement in the 1950s. And so here I am really talking to the goddess of the entire movement. She's listening, and I'm assuming she's kind of following this and all this, but I'm terrible at communicating well when I get super excited. I'm super excited to be talking to Dolores Huerta. And she finally puts her hand on my shoulder to settle me down. She says, well, I actually have no idea what you're talking about, but I can tell you this, young man. I have never seen a successful revolution that didn't start with the farmers. That, I think, is worth hanging your hat on right there. This woman knows that the food system and the farmers that would create it are the pinnacle of change. And of course, they are the keystone to any stable economy. If you don't have food sovereignty, if you don't have food security, you do not have a society. And so she understands that in spades, and I'm sure that's why she was so successful in Congress and elsewhere of changing hearts and minds of regulators, because she could show them that if you miss this one thing, if you screw this up, your country will collapse. And so we need that Dolores Huerta clarity that this is the linchpin, this is the cornerstone of anything that we construct in civilization here forward. And we need to treat the soil with intelligence and respect that it deserves, so that we literally have an underground movement. We need the mycelium to be part of that movement. We need the microbes to restore health and regeneration, and we need the consumer, which, by the way, is the very largest thing ever created in human history, is consumer behavior. It commands more wealth, more money, more energy than anything that's ever existed before, is the behavior of the Western world's consumer. And so we are the thing that will change the event. And Farmer's Footprint is here to start telling our own story, from the soil to the farmer to the consumer, so that we can understand how we can mobilize the biggest power that's ever existed in mankind, which is our own consumer behavior, to fundamentally change things overnight. Because absolutely right, just as Charles said, the politicians will follow in a heartbeat. They simply need to get reelected. When we change our sentiment, when we change our voting pattern, we will start to move in that direction. Farmer's Footprint, like I was saying, or not forget Farmer's Footprint, the regen movement as a whole is a template for everything else to change. And so, Charles, I'm not going to give up on you. I might come back and pester you again for this run for office on your over across the pond there, but we're launching a new institute called Institute of Natural Law and Governance, and it's really taking the lessons we've learned from regen farming and starting to apply it as an activation and education system to show that there is a long-standing cohesive philosophy of social change and governance, and it's called natural law. And it's been around for thousands of years, practiced by nearly every indigenous community that grew larger than a few thousand people were practicing natural law. It was the founding documents of the United States. It was the founding documents of a lot of the British colonies. And so we have knowledge of how we can do this well, and in line with nature is the next piece of it. Because when you read natural law, it turns out it never mentions anything about nature. It's all about natural human systems and human governance and human this and human that. And so we're at the Institute starting to bring the biology into this, where we teach the rights of nature and the functional singularity between soil health and ecosystem health, soil, water, and air, how those need to be integrated into our definitions of natural law. And then we need to unify natural law with the governance structures of the Western world at large, as well as bring this into the Eastern philosophy, just as Confucius and the Tao Te Ching tried to do thousands of years ago. So it's time for this revolution to happen in the soil, and it will immediately form these greater systems around us as we move forward. So I couldn't be more excited that the solutions are sitting right in front of us. Again, if we had to go think of the solutions for the crisis at hand, we're screwed. The solutions are right in front of us. Nature has shown them to us for thousands of years, and indigenous wisdom has embraced those and integrated themselves into that wisdom for thousands of years. And we see farmers now doing this. Natural intelligence farming happening in Australia. Hello, it's happening right now, and it's easy compared to what you would think. And that gets me excited that the linchpin or the bottleneck is not at the doing part; it's at the being part. We need to be at one with nature, and then our behavior will align quickly with the natural systems that will ignite it.
Blair, can I just add something quickly?
Of course.
And that's to thank you guys for what you're doing. Brilliant. And I think you're the right guy. You're not threatening, and you're passionate and all that. So, but good effort, mate. And I've got a question for you, Zach. Did you ever get to see that wonderful mentor, Wendell Berry, at all?
Yeah, actually got to talk to him pretty recently.
Right.
Amazing moment. And I was just at a poetry conference way up in the Colorado Rockies this past weekend, and we had like 4.5 feet of snow and about 40 poets. And Wendell Berry's poetry book won every single time. There was hundreds of poets represented in all the literature was there. And there was like this poetry read-off where people would try to get the best poem reading in there, and Wendell Berry's poems won every single day. And I found that fascinating, that we had the whole breadth of thousands of years of poets, and Wendell Berry kept just speaking truth into our hearts so profoundly, because he's really speaking to this moment. We have been moving towards this moment for tens of thousands of years, and here we are in 7.9 billion souls showed up right now to be part of this tipping point of consciousness where we rewrite ourselves back into a nature to move from a receiver of natural resources to a co-creator with those natural resources. This is a new era. This is a new epoch that's about to birth. And I am just honored to be witness to your impact, Blair, and the entire team at Farmers Footprint Australia to see this thing roll, because it's going to have its own momentum behind it, and it will roll up behind those forest fires. It will roll up behind those floods to give hope to people that have been left hopeless by systems of nature that seem to be opposed to them. So I'm very excited for your timing. I think it could not be better for Farmers Footprint to be sweeping across that country to say we can do this together with nature, and things are going to turn out much differently than we've ever experienced in our previous hundreds of thousands of years.
It's great. I'll just